What's up, guys? Today I am joined by a very special guest. I'm joined by Rohan Chakravarthi, I think it is. Hopefully, I'm not messing up your last name, but
Yeah, perfectly.
how are you doing today, Rohan? Obviously, you were at Dre 4 of training camp, and you've been there all the training camp days that were available to the fans. But how are you doing today, Rohan?
Doing good, doing good. Enjoying my experience. Definitely been busy, been a grind, but I embrace it. I love it, and definitely glad to be here finally on with you. I know we've been wanting to do this for a minute, and yeah, here it is.
Yep. Well, first off, I just want you to introduce yourself to, the audience real quick. Obviously, you also have your own Niners channel, which is your name, Rohan Chakravarthi, and you've been posting phenomenal content not only on Twitter but also on your YouTube channel. So if you
Correct.
haven't already subscribed to his channel, please go do that. That link is in the description. But why don't you introduce yourself to the audience real quick?
Yeah, so I am Rohan Chakravarthi. Like you mentioned, I write and I cover the 49ers for 49ers WebZone, one of the better 49ers news sites out there. So be sure to check that out. Bunch of written content. Over the last week, I've been posting daily 11 on 11 play by play breakdowns because I take my notebook when I go to training camp. So I'm writing down the play by play. Put out an article just a couple of minutes ago. Then I break down the offense and defense. So you guys got to be sure to check out there. Like you said, Amin, I have my own YouTube channel, and then Twitter is where I am most active on social media.
Yep, and you've been posting phenomenal content, like I said, on Twitter as well.
Thank
But
you.
let's jump right into it. Starting off with obviously the main topic, which is the quarterback position. And for the last 2 days, day 2 and day 3 of training camp, Trey Lance has not had the easiest of days, and he has been struggling a little bit. Obviously, day 2, I think he was 6 for 14, and then day 3, which was yesterday, he was 3 for 10. But Trey Lance had a little bit of a bounce back practice, and he went 8 for 15 and threw an interception at the end of practice to Fred Warner. But since you were out there, how did Trey Lance look today? Did he look better? Did he look more confident? How did Trey Lance look today?
Trey Lance had his best practice of the entirety of training camp today, and it was clear the improvement in a way, and it was maybe you can attribute it to confidence. You said it 8 of 15, threw an interception, but he also had two passes that were dropped. One by George Kittle, a 10-yard pass across the middle. Kittle just tried to haul it in. Fred Warner made a nice play on the ball, but it should have been a catch. Then Jeff Wilson Jr. in the flat bobbled a pass from Trey Lance. It was a nice pass. It wasn't behind him or anything. Nice pass. Wilson Jr. just didn't concentrate on the ball immediately. And then as he tried to catch it again, he was hammered by Jimmy Ward. So 10 of 15 in my book, pretty much with those two drops not included. Good day overall from Trey Lance. But the biggest thing, I mean, I don't really care about the completion percentage at the moment. The biggest thing to me, he's hitting throws everywhere, which is what the 49ers wanted to do with this install over the last couple of days. Try and aim deep. Test these cornerbacks, these top level cornerbacks deep, test them intermediately, see where and what works. Lance had completions of 50 yards, 27 yards, 25 yards, 20 yards, and 18 yards today. And those were on different throws. He's been able to hit different throws, and that's showing a positive ahead of padded training camp practices on Monday.
Thank you for the insight. Now, obviously, like I said, Trey Lance had struggles the last couple of days, but it's good to see him bouncing back. And I heard a lot about him and Ayuk today. He hit up Ayuk for a couple of 3 or 4 passes today. And obviously they've been working on in the offseason. So you can already tell that him and Ayuk are building a pretty good chemistry. And we could see hopefully a lot of, highlight plays throughout the season with obviously Trey Lance and Brandon Ayuk. And the biggest surprise outside of Trey Lance was Jimmy Garoppolo was there today. And the fans were cheering for Jimmy Garoppolo. Jimmy Garoppolo was out on the sideline and he was running back and forth a little bit. But were you surprised to see Jimmy Garoppolo at all? Obviously, after 2 bad practices, Jimmy Garoppolo shows up and he's there. But were you surprised to see Jimmy Garoppolo at all?
I'll give you a two-part answer. One on the bad practices of Lance that I just didn't touch on, and then Garoppolo. I was shocked as hell. I'll be totally honest. I did not expect Garoppolo there. Like in that place that Garoppolo has been running with the exact like you've seen Debo Samuel. he Debo Samuel wears the exact same gear that Garoppolo was wearing, runs on that exact same
The
sideline.
exact same. Yep,
People were going
exactly.
out. People probably were looking at that area thinking Debo Samuel is probably going to show up, and they want to see Debo Samuel. It's a Saturday. You're with your family. You might want to see a little Debo action before he hits the field on Monday, probably. But instead, they see Jimmy out there. And the funniest thing, I had dropped a report based on a source that I heard that Jimmy Garoppolo has been talking with the New York Giants. That was at 10 o'clock. At 10:05 a.m., Jimmy Garoppolo walks out on the field, and I'm like, whew, this is interesting. But he was out on the field for maybe 5-10 minutes, went back in probably for his workout after that.
Yep. Well, moving on to the next topic. Obviously, Charvarius Ward had another phenomenal practice, had an interception. And I mean, this is looking good so far. I mean, the Niners did not have that many big offseason and splashy offseason moves and free agency moves, but their biggest one was obviously signing Charvarius Ward, who has been looking like a stud so far in training camp. So, how did he look today?
Oops, was on mute. But Trivarius Ward looked fine today. I'd say Thursday was his best day that I watched him. Ward still was fine today. Had the interception, big time play. Nate Sudfeld was intending a pass about 45 yards down the field for Ray McLeod, who had a step on Ward, but the pass was underthrown. Ward made a great play on the ball, interception there. That was Ward's made play. He did also have a PBU, I believe. I can check real quick. But Trivarius Ward, yeah, another good day for Trivarius Ward. He in general was just having good coverage, and even when he allowed a catch like the 50-yard catch to Brandon Ayuk, that Ayuk just made a phenomenal catch on. It was a right sideline throw, great throw from Lance, great catch. Trevarius Ward was in coverage, and he still had pretty damn good coverage. It required a perfect throw from Lance to hit on the outside part of the boundary for Ayuk to make a play on it. And so to me, Ward is still the best player out there so far on the defense because I'm not really attributing too much with the defensive line. Ward has been the best player there in the back end for the 49ers so far. And that's a great sign because they haven't necessarily had elite cornerback play for a while.
Yep, and I've said this before. I think this is probably the best secondary in the Shanahan Lynch era. I mean, obviously Charvarius Ward, but then Emmanuel Mosley, who's been getting better every year that he's been on the 49ers and who had an underrated year last year. But so far, this signing has been looking really, really good. And hopefully, obviously, Jason Verrett can also come back. And if he can be 60% of what he was in his last year healthy, I think the Niners will have a really, really good secondary this upcoming season.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, Mosley is one of the most underrated players on the team. Him and Jimmy Ward, in my opinion, are the two most
Yep.
underrated. He continues to just ball out, really. Mosley today, I think, was targeted maybe once or twice and recorded a PBU like play. I think the one play that I can clearly remember, Lance was trying to hit Ray McLeod on a 13-yard play over the middle. Mosley was in coverage, incompletion. That's just the consistent part about Emmanuel Mosley. He hasn't necessarily allowed that many catches, if any, really, throughout training camp so far. He's just been a lockdown corner. The quarterbacks just aren't throwing his way. And to me, what this means, you got C Ward on the outside, Mosley on the other outside, just locking him down. The one question right now in that secondary is who's going to be at slot and can they hold up? Because that's where a lot of targets are going to go against with this 49ers defense.
Yep, definitely agree with you there. Couple of injuries already, and the biggest injury the Niners had was Maurice Hurst, who I think tore. I forgot what it was. He tore something. I don't remember exactly.
Yeah, he
Uh,
tore biceps
yeah, he
yesterday.
tore his bicep. Yeah, he tore his bicep, and he's out for a majority of the year. And Kyle Shanahan said that he's not going to rule out him coming back maybe late in the season. But I mean, Maurice Hurst, from what I've heard, has had a pretty good training camp so far. And then not only Maurice Hurst, but also Eric Armstead. Even Eric Armstead, it's not a big injury. He has an MCL sprain. It's not a big injury, but the Niners are already getting hit by the injury bug. And I mean, this was probably another concern outside of, the offensive line and Trey Lance coming into the season was, can the team stay healthy? And if you look at the pattern of just what the Niners have been since they've had a pretty good roster, as 2019 obviously made it to the Super Bowl. 2020 you had a bunch of injuries, were plagued by injuries, and then 2021 you had a healthy season, made it to an NFC Championship game, and then obviously 2022. Who knows? I mean, so far it's been a healthy season, and it's been an injury riddled season, and a healthy season. So who knows how the season is gonna go? But the Niners have already been hit with the injury bug.
And it's interesting, right? We talk about the defensive line, the insane depth on the defensive line, and suddenly there are a couple of key players on that defensive line that are going down. You talk about Maurice Hurst. I personally thought he looked good. He has been the DT number two in the backup rotation with Kevin Givens. Both of them have looked pretty good in the practices that they were there. So good job there by both of them. Additionally, the other guys that went down, Hassan Ridgeway, viewed, in my opinion, as a kind of an insurance policy for Javon Kinlaw. Hassan Ridgeway is an athletic freak, but he's more of a run stuffing guy. He was, in my opinion, the 49ers signed him so that they have somebody there if Kinlaw gets injured. He might be out for the entirety of training camp now with that quad injury that might cost him a couple of weeks. And then Armstead, like you said, is sprained MCL. Now, the 49ers defense didn't necessarily lose a beat because Kevin Givens came in, Kinlaw returned, and he finally played in scrimmage today. Looked pretty good, I'd say. He's been looking good in individual drills. Looked pretty good today. We can get that to that in a bit. But you're right. The depth there is somewhat slowly diminishing. But then again, when you look at the overall roster for this 49ers defensive line, the one benefit is the 49ers can sustain these type of injuries and still be productive with their defensive
Yep.
line. I mentioned how Givens has been there, but it's also other guys. Robert Nikomdiche has looked pretty good. He was signed on Monday, and he looks like he's been with the team for a little bit. So he's looked pretty good. And overall, the defensive line has still looked like the best unit on the roster. So to me, it's a tough loss to lose Maurice Hurst for the second year in a row. Arik Armstead as well. It's a tough loss to lose him. But overall, I think the 49ers defensive line, that's the reason why they piled up this amount of depth.
Yep, and I mean, you mentioned it. The depth at that defensive line position is just, we're stacked at the defensive line position. Obviously, the starters with Bosa, and then hopefully Javon Kinlaw can stay healthy this year, and then Armstead. But you have a lot of depth at that D line position. You have Hyder, you have Jordan Willis. Obviously, you mentioned Kevin Givens. So even if someone goes down, you still can have someone come in and be kind of productive and have an impact on this defensive line. The defensive line won't take that much of a toll if someone goes down, or the defensive line won't take the defensive line won't be that much different if someone goes down. Now obviously someone major goes down, it would be huge, but if someone like Maurice Hurst goes down, you still have a guy like Kevin Givens, you still have a guy like Javon Kinlaw, so you still have players to come in and replace them and still be productive. So that defensive line, I mean, the defensive line depth is just amazing.
Yeah, definitely.
David McNew says, ever since we left Candlestick, there have been a lot of injuries. The Candlestick curse. Paul says, "What's up, fam? Hey, Rohan." So I wanted to ask you this because obviously, like I said, you were there on day 4. But who stood out today on day 4 of training camp? Who stood out? If you could give maybe one on offense and one on defense, but who stood out today mainly in training camp?
Yeah, so I'll start on offense because it's a guy who I've been looking for. He has struggled initially to he's been doing really good against the second and third team, but he struggled initially to try and consistently win against the top cornerbacks in Emmanuel Mosley and Charvarius Ward, and broke out today. 5 catches on I think 8 or 9 targets, and a couple of them were just errant throws. He made like I said, the 50-yard catch earlier. He made a nice catch to end practice. It was a jump catch over Dante Johnson on the far shoulder of his side when he was breaking in on a slant route for 20 yards. He had multiple nice catches, be it with Lance, he had 3 catches, or Sudfeld, he had 2 catches. That's Brandon Ayuk. He finally looks like that. I mean, it's 3 days in, so it's not necessarily finally, but I've truly believed that he could be a wide receiver number one in an offense. And Brandon Ayuk finally showed some of those roots of potentially being a wide receiver one today. He looked good. He was the best player on offense for the 49ers today. And that's a huge sign, especially for a team currently missing Debo Samuel. Can they have someone that can shoulder the load? Ayuk struggled a little bit in the earlier days just to get open against Ward and Mosley. But today he looked pretty good, even in areas where he wasn't necessarily as open.
Yep, I mean the one obvious choice would be Tarvarius Moore because Tarvarius Moore had 2 interceptions. Now, obviously, he had that torn ACL last year, but he came back and had a bounce back practice and bounce back training camp day, and he had 2 interceptions. Obviously, Sudfield was struggling today. Now, obviously, I still think Sudfield is the QB2. I don't think Purdy's there yet, and I think Sudfield is overall the better quarterback. But Sudfield so far has not had the best training camp, and that Niners defense in general, and even the secondary, has just been phenomenal throughout 4 days of training camp.
Yeah, I'll talk about Sudfeld in a minute, but since you mentioned the number one most obvious choice in Tarvarius Moore, I'll go a different route, a little more of an underrated name on defense. Diomedor Lenore. Diomedor Lenore has been a guy who people have somewhat counted out after not really showing up much in his rookie year. Diomedor Lenore, though, started camp on the outside as opposed to what many thought he could be the potential replacement for K'Wan Williams. Instead, he's been the second team cornerback on the outside with Ambry Thomas, and he's looked like the better cornerback of the two. And this is coming from a guy who had high hopes for Ambry Thomas, honestly, heading into training camp. And it's not to say Thomas has looked bad. I thought Thomas had some up and down reps today. We can mention that later. But Diomedor Lenore has been press coverage corner, despite not necessarily having a ton of pure speed, and he kept up today. One specific rep on Trivarius Moore's second interception, the deep one to Danny Gray. Who was the cornerback in coverage? It was Diomedor Lenore. It was a bad throw initially because Lenore was step in step with Danny Gray running a deep route, who struggled to get open. And then Charvarius Ward came through and made the interception at the end. But great start, in my opinion, for Diomedor Lenore, who at this point seems like a good pick to make the 53-man roster.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Diomede Lenore. I thought he looked pretty good last year. Also, for the couple of games that he was started, he had obviously made some rookie mistakes, and he got beat one time for this deep touchdown in Philadelphia. But I thought he looked solid when he was playing last season. But I'm glad to hear that he's been doing pretty well. He had a good day today because I'm a huge Diomede Lenore fan and believer. So I wanted him to make the roster, and I like him more than I like Ambry Thomas last year. But it's good to hear that he's been doing well. And you mentioned Brandon Ayuk. I was there on day 2, obviously, and Brandon Ayuk was making definitely some tough catches. And Brandon Ayuk has just been really good throughout training camp. I've heard a lot of buzz around him throughout training camp. So who knows, man? Brandon Ayuk maybe might be the wide receiver one this year over Debo Samuel because he's already building that chemistry with Trey Lance. And the longer that Debo Samuel still isn't participating in team drills, Brandon Ayuk possibly could end up the wide receiver number one by the end of the year.
I think so too. Yeah, he could be, but I mean, I don't anticipate it, but I think so. It could be.
Moving on to the next topic, the 2019 defense. Obviously, that was the year that the Niners made it to the Super Bowl. The 2019 defense was one of the best, if not the best, not the best defense in the Niners in the Shanahan and Lynch era, and it was just a phenomenal defense. But obviously, through the 4 days of training camp, there's a lot of buzz about this defense, and the Niners defense already has almost 10 picks throughout, I think, 4 days of training camp. So I want to ask you the question: which defense do you think will be better based off what you've seen so far, the 2019 defense or the 2022 defense?
Now remember, the 2019 defense was ranked second overall in a number of statistics. So when you're talking about pure rankings, I think it's tough for the 2022 defense to replicate that, just because there are a number of good defenses in the NFL compared to maybe. I think the strength of defenses currently is a little stronger than over there. Like you've got the Bills who already have a strong defense. You've got teams like the Chargers who might have a strong defense. I know a lot of people like the Browns. Me, not as much for a top five defense, but then the Eagles also have a strong defense on top of the 49ers. So if we're talking potential ranking, remember the 49ers play one of the hardest schedules in the NFL, whereas a team like the Eagles face one of the easiest schedules in the NFL. So just the rankings overall might jump the 49ers a couple of spots. But I think this defense had the potential to be what the 2019 defense was. Remember, over the last, in 2019 and 2021, the 49ers have been top five in sacks and sack rate. And I think this team, at least so far, has the potential to replicate that type of process. On top of that, what this team now has at least shown over the last couple of days is the ability to create turnovers. That hasn't been something that's been there over the last few years for the 49ers. And I think the turnover part, especially because they're playing a lot more man coverage as opposed to in 2019 when they featured a lot more zone looks, I think that that could be something the 49ers may benefit from a lot more. Maybe there are some bigger plays given up because of the situation, but they've got top level corners and top level safety in Jimmy Ward, in my opinion. So I think it's definitely got the potential. I won't go so far as to say it, just because that defense was talented and it also survived big injuries. And one thing we've already seen is the injury issue with Armstead, for example, and obviously Maurice Hurst. So that's the one thing that I won't go so far as to say it, but I could definitely see the potential as for where this 2022 defense can go.
Yep, I definitely agree with you. I won't go as far as to say, you know what, the 2019 defense or the 2022 defense will be better because obviously I can't predict the future. But that 2022 defense right now, based off what we've seen, has been really, really good. And I think I personally like the cornerback room better. And I think the cornerbacks will be better this year than they were in 2019. But I don't think you'll see a better D line than 2019, obviously, because you had Armstead, Bosa, Ford, Buckner, and just the level of productivity from all those guys. Eric Armstead had a career year that year. So I think that 2019 defense, just based off the starters on the defensive line, I don't think you can beat that. But that cornerback room with Charvarius Ward, Mosley, obviously Jason Verrett, if he can play and he can come back healthy, I think the cornerbacks are probably better, but this Niners defense has the potential to replicate that 2019 success because of the depth of the D line position, and then obviously that cornerback room with the new addition of Charvarius Ward. And I think we might see more turnovers this year from the 49ers because if you look at the Niners just overall in general, we don't see a lot of interceptions from the Niners, and I think that'll change this year. Obviously because we have Charvarius Ward and Mosley and all these guys, but I think we will see more turnovers from the 49ers this year. Because usually we don't see that with the Niners, but I think that'll change this year. But like you said, I think this Niners defense has the potential to replicate what they did in 2019, and I think each defense has a strength that the 2019 one didn't have, or that's better than the 2019 one or the 2022 one. But I think this Niners defense definitely has the potential to replicate what they did in 2019.
Yeah, I could see it too.
Moving on to the next topic. Obviously there's a lot of guys that people in the Niners community and I'm a huge Leon O'Neal guy. I really like him and just his mentality. But looking on the defensive side, how does these guys look? Leon O'Neal, Samuel Womack, Tariq Castro Fields, how have these guys looked in particular based off just what you've seen?
Yeah, O'Neal has been playing only with the third team safeties. I know a lot of people do like him. I personally don't believe that he will make the 53-man roster. Seems like a practice squad guy for me right now. But he has been seen being coached up a bunch by the coaching staff, by Talanoa Hufanga at times and things like that. Womack initially looked a little bit. It's not that he looked promising, but he was getting action with the second team defense, with the first team slot cornerback. However, today there was a change. Dante Johnson took almost all the reps with the first team defense at slot cornerback. Denard then took all the second team reps, and Womack was the third team cornerback. Although it's also imperative to know that Kyle Shanahan likes testing his rookies, so it's not too big of a deal to me so far. Castro Fields, though, on the other hand, has looked the best of the three names so far. He is, in my opinion, an outside corner. He was played in the slot in OTAs and minicamp and maybe didn't look as good, but he's looked like an outside corner in the NFL during the initial part of training camp. Today, I can name one certain play. It was a somewhat of a slant route by Danny Gray. Gray ended up making the catch. He initially bobbled it and made the catch, but it was phenomenal coverage by Castro Fields on a guy that quick. And it was like a 12-yard route, but Castro Fields was hounding right all over Gray. I thought it was good coverage. Overall, I think Castro Fields has the potential to make this roster. I don't know if he will, just based on the amount of names that are there, but I wouldn't be surprised if a guy like Dante Johnson, who could end up starting in the slot for the 49ers, gets cut because he doesn't have to clear waivers. A guy like Castro Fields come on, and then when Verrett gets put on an IR list or something, a guy like Dante Johnson gets brought back.
Thank you for that insight. Obviously, you made a lot of great points and a lot of great observations. How's Danny Gray looked? Because I've heard that Danny Gray had a good play a couple of days ago where he had this deep 45-yard play where he burned through the whole defense. But how has he looked so far?
He's looked conflicting, I'll say that. Danny Gray had the huge play where he burned third team cornerback Kadar Holman for a touchdown, pretty much, and the ball was underthrown by, I believe it was Brock Purdy. But overall, Danny Gray hasn't necessarily popped up as much as people would have thought he would. He's gotten action. That's not been the issue. He's gotten action. He's gotten targets, but I expected a little more separation coming from Danny Gray. It's just he's not as refined in his route running yet. He's been running a good amount of go routes, but not necessarily a amount of regular routes. The one route that I saw that was I've seen two regular routes out of Danny Gray outside that when I was specifically focusing on him. One was the play I just told you about where Castro Fields, a 4-3-8 corner, was on his tail, despite it being a slant and Gray having his speed. And then the second one was a comeback route, and Ambry Thomas, a guy who has struggled a little bit at times, was all over him. He had a phenomenal rep on that play, not holding him at all, but staying all over Danny Gray. So he struggled a little bit, in my opinion, in the short field to get open. And that is something that I will monitor as training camp continues because I know some people have used the term one trick pony. At this point, Danny Gray might just be a one trick pony that works 50% of the time because he hasn't shown too much outside of that one deep ball.
Well, I mean, he is pretty fast. So, I mean, that's what a lot of people look at when they look at Danny Gray, is that speed, that killer speed. But looking at the offense and the offensive line, there's been a lot of guys that the Niners have drafted this obviously draft in the later rounds, such as Nick Zakelj, and then someone, and obviously Spencer Buford, and then obviously they had Donovan West, who's the undrafted center, and then same thing with Jason Poe. But how have these guys looked at? What's your overall analysis on the offensive line so far, and also these guys in specific?
So I'll talk about the offensive line first. Initially, I'll be honest, it was struggling. Up until today, I thought it was struggling. I didn't think it was concerning because one thing to note, guys, before pads are put on, defensive line automatically has the advantage just because the offensive line can't really block as much and can't be as physical because of the lack of pads. But it was a little concern. It's not that it was a little. It was a little disappointing. I don't know what the exact word. It wasn't as good of a performance over the last few days. Today, though, Trent Williams returned, Mike McGlinchey returned, and you saw the offensive line potentially look pretty solid. I'd be honest. I mean, there were still a couple of sacks. I think there were maybe 4 sacks overall, maybe 5 sacks overall. A couple of them being rollout sacks. But overall, I thought the offensive line's first team at least looked good. Something to note, Daniel Brunskill did eclipse Jake Brendel. They've been rotating every day with the first team center. Daniel Brunskill took a majority, though, of the first team center reps for the first time today that I've seen. So that is something that is something to be monitored because I think the 49ers right now think they want Daniel Brunskill to start. And so that's something to be monitored. I think the 49ers offensive line looked good. The one guy who right now that I spoke on Spaces about that I might have a concern about, right guard Spencer Burford. He's the one who got handled today in a rep by Kevin Givens. He got a sack, gave up a sack to Kevin Givens today. McGlinchey, he gave up a sack as well to Nick Bosa, held him on another play. But it's fine to me until pads come on, until the physicality's there. That's when I'll fully judge. But offensive line looked better today. More importantly, they look better in run blocking. You saw a lot of TFLs in the first few days. Today, you saw a couple of crisp runs.
Um, Obviously, the offensive line coming into season was a bit of a question mark, and there was a lot of unknowns, obviously because of Alex Mack retiring, and then Laken Tomlinson obviously going to the New York Jets. So this offensive line has had a lot of question marks, and this is probably outside of Trey Lance was the biggest concern, or was the biggest, I think it's probably the biggest determining factor if the Niners do have success outside of Trey Lance this upcoming season, because you've lost a lot of key guys. And then one guy that I didn't mention that I was going to ask you about, because I've heard some good things and then I've heard some bad things about him. I don't know honestly what to think at this point about Aaron Banks. I've mentioned that I wanted Asante Samuel Jr. last year, and it was obviously a bit concerning last year that in pretty much majority of the games, Aaron Banks was inactive. I was at that first preseason game during when the Niners played the Chiefs last year. He didn't look too great, and then he obviously got hurt. But what's your overall analysis on Aaron Banks so far? How do you think he's been doing so far?
Um, he's looked good. I'll be honest. I think I tweeted this out yesterday. I think Aaron Banks through the first two practices was the best offensive lineman on the field. Um, and that was obviously taken with a grain of salt, given no pads, and also given that Colton McKivitz and Jalen Moore were starting. But it was them two, Burford and Brendel, and Banks was the best offensive lineman. He's had a couple of reps where obviously he struggled. Today he had another one. The first play of the day, Javon Kinlaw absolutely bullied him back, recorded a pressure while Trey Lance completed a throw to Juwan Jennings. So that was a play today. But apart from that, I thought Aaron Banks looked pretty good today. One other thing, Aaron Banks seems like he's going to be a fine run blocker. The left side was the better run blocking side today. Obviously, you have the silverback Trent Williams there. But Aaron Banks, I thought, was a pretty solid run blocker today. He seems in shape, and I think he will honestly be one of the better offensive linemen for the 49ers today. This year.
I mean, one thing that'll obviously help Aaron Banks is that right next to Aaron Banks is obviously the best offensive lineman in football, which is Trent Williams. So obviously that will help. And I'm more concerned about that right side with the right guard and right tackle, than I am concerned with the left side. Um, but that's good to hear. I appreciate that because I've heard some good and some bad, but it's definitely good news to hear that Aaron Banks has been looking good so far. So that's obviously a good sign, because when you draft an offensive lineman so high in the second round, you obviously most people expected him to start last year, and we thought he might have started last year, but it's obviously a good thing to hear that in his second year he's been looking pretty good so far. So I appreciate you for that insight, Rohan.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not saying that Banks has looked the perfect, amazing, right? He's definitely going through growing pains as well. He's definitely had some poor reps as well. But overall, I think Banks has done a bit of work, and I think honestly, he's one of the better ones so far that I've seen.
Well, moving on to the last topic of the day. I appreciate you for joining me, Rohan. But obviously, like you mentioned, Brunskill was getting the center snaps, majority of the center snaps today. And in the beginning of the first like 2 or 3 days, Brunskill was the backup center. I think the first day Brunskill was the backup center behind Brendel,
Yeah.
but he has been getting center snaps. So, do you think Brunskill will be the new starting center for the 49ers over Jake Brendel, who the Niners have been hyping up, and the Niners have been saying that he was going to, might play center this year? And then another question would be, if Brunskill is the new starting center, who's going to play right guard? Obviously, you mentioned you're not too impressed with Buford, and he has been struggling a little bit in certain reps. So, who do you think Brunskill will be the new starting center? And then, if you do say yes, who do you think will fill in at that right guard position?
Yeah, and to clarify, it's not that I think Burford has been struggling necessarily. It's again growing pains. It's just he's the one guy where I wonder the most about right now. But Brunskill at center, I think right now Brunskill, the 49ers at least, based on what they've been doing, their plan, they've slowly ramped it up where they've had Brunskill take more and more snaps every day at center. And yeah, Brunskill right now looks like the better center. I personally thought that it would be like Brunskill struggled on the first few days. Brunskill does struggle. He had snap issues, and he had a couple of blocking issues as well. in pass protection. But today, Bronskill had his best day. Didn't really have a snap issue. Played a majority of the first team snaps and looked pretty good in pass protection as well with Trey Lance. That wasn't necessarily one of the areas where a lot of the pressure was coming through. So that's a good sign. I think the 49ers have been trying to ramp up Brunskill to start at center, despite hyping up Jake Brendel. I initially thought Brendel would be the starter just because of the relationship with Trey Lance, which is so important with the rookie quarterback, and also because Brendel was calling the productions. But it seems like Brunskill right now is their guy. I posted a video earlier today. Them two, Brunskill and Lance, were working together
Yep.
after practice today for a little bit, working on snaps, working probably on communication, and so that's something to monitor as well. Can Brunskill sustain what he did today at center for the remainder of training camp? And will Brendel look good when pads come on? Because he, in my opinion, is more of a run blocker than a pass protector.
Yep, and then obviously right guard. Who do you think will play right guard? Because obviously I saw that video also where Trey Lance and Brunskill are working after practice. So if Brunskill is the new starting center, who's gonna play right guard?
I think it's still Spencer Burford. I think the 49ers are too enamored with him. And I think that even if he gets competition, then we'll see what the competition is. The guy you point on the screen might be his competition. But right now, Jalen Moore kind of got screwed in this position because he's been entrenched to play the tackle position while McGlinchey and while Williams kind of get acclimated back. So he's been having to play tackle because while Williams was back today. Moore saw time at left tackle while Williams was back. Moore played a majority of the left tackle reps over there, and Schluter played behind him, Sam Schluter, that is, the undrafted free agent. So he hasn't necessarily seen any time at right guard. Neither has Brunskill. So really, there hasn't been much competition. The backup right guard, Jason Poe, has looked probably with all honesty, Jason Poe might be the worst offensive lineman on the roster currently, which is a little alarming, unfortunately, for our guy No Border Sports in the chat section because I know he really likes Poe. But Poe might be the worst offensive lineman on the 49ers roster with Justin Skule coming in at second so far, at least. I don't think Poe makes the roster. He's been brutally killed and pass protection by almost anybody that comes in his way. Today was Robert Nicomdiche. So to me, I think it's Burford because the 49ers are enamored with his athleticism. And I think that that is going to show in run blocking, similar to how Trent Williams gets his go off in run blocking. I'm not saying they're going to be comparable, but I think he'll look good in when it comes to run blocking. And also now that he's finally got a right tackle that knows how to like really do his job right next to him, he doesn't have to worry about the right tackle. Only has to worry about his job. So I think he'll improve as time goes along.
Yep, I think Brunskill is gonna be the new starting center. Now I think obviously Brendel, people are saying, and I thought it was gonna be Brendel coming into the season. But I think it is going to be Daniel Brunskill. I think since he has been working out with Trey Lance, and obviously he was getting majority of the center snaps today, I think Daniel Brunskill will be the new starting center for the 49ers, at least moving forward going into next year. And then at right guard, I think it probably is going to be Spencer Buford. Now I like Jalen Moore, and I think David McNeil also said Jalen Moore question mark. I like Jalen Moore. I thought he might have maybe should have deserved a spot or should have at least gotten a chance at right guard. But the way it's looking so far, at least throughout 4 days of training camp, Buford has been playing majority of the right guard snaps. So I think so far the way it's looking right now, I think Buford probably is going to be the new starting right guard if Brunskill obviously does end up being the 49ers center this upcoming season.
Yeah, I could see it.
No Border Sword says when Brunskill does something new, he usually looks bad. I think it's his confidence because he snaps out of it quick enough. He didn't look good when he first switched to right guard. Well, that basically wraps up the show. Do you have any final thoughts or comments before we are done with the show?
Nah, I got to tell you, thank you for bringing me on. It's been a blast. Glad we got to do this and glad we got to talk about training camp. You're one of the younger guys on here. I know I was young when I started here as well. And just keep doing your thing. I mean, you're gonna be doing nice things in a couple of years for sure.
I appreciate that, Rohan, and same thing to you. I mean, you're a couple years older than me, but you're also younger than majority of the Niners. Niners content creators, and but you're doing great stuff. Hopefully hopefully the finger fatigue goes away because of all those tweets you've been putting out in training camp. David McNew asked the question, Rohan, how does Donovan West? How is he looking? He has experience at tackle, guard, and center. So how has he looked so far?
Yeah, he really hasn't seen much action at all. So, unfortunately, because there's the center battle, Brendel and Brunskill have been taking up the majority of the center reps. The third guy is Keaton Sutherland. Keaton Sutherland was the second team right guard today, but he also took third team center reps. And so Donovan West right now is the fourth team center, and it's unfortunate to both him and Poe because Poe can't play center. Probably a better position for him. Actually, I mean, I'm not sure really at this point, but probably a better position for him. But Poe won't get any reps if he was a center only. And West is the 14 guy. He barely makes the field really in scrimmages. He is a bona fide practice squad guy if he makes it there.
Yep. Well, I appreciate you for joining me. Obviously, Rohan, you've been doing a great stuff at training camp. Phenomenal content, not only on YouTube but also on Twitter. If you haven't already checked out Rohan's channel or subscribed to Rohan's channel, go do that. That link is in the description. Subscribe to Rohan's channel. It's his name, Rohan Chakravarthi. Go subscribe to his channel. Go follow him on Twitter for all the latest updates on training camp. He's always there. Any pass or during scrimmages or 11 on 11s, anything happens, quickly go check Rohan's Twitter. It's there. He updates you all the time. So go follow Rohan on Twitter, and then go check out his co-host Marco Martinez, who he also does shows on at 49ers Red Zone. I think that's what the channel is called, right?
Yeah.
49ers Red Zone. That link is also in the description. Go check out that channel also. Go subscribe to that channel as well. And go follow Marco on Twitter as well. Marco is his co-host when they do streams together. So go follow both of these guys on Twitter. Go subscribe to both the YouTube channels. You've been doing phenomenal stuff, Rohan. And then some other YouTube channels also in the chat. No Border Sports. If you haven't already subscribed to No Border Sports channel, I had Ryan on a couple of days ago. I think it was day two of training camp. I had No Border Sports on. So, or day one. I honestly do not remember if it was day one or day two, but go subscribe to No Border Sports. That's Crypto Ryan and Maruna's channel. They also do 49ers, great 49ers content there. Yesterday they had Mariah and Tehran from the 49ers Faithful Lead podcast, and they did an episode with Niner Sickness on Thursday. So go check out their channel, and then also Niner Sickness. If you haven't already checked out Niner Sickness's channel, he is also another phenomenal Niner content creator. So go check out both of these guys if you haven't already. And shout out to the chat. We had a good amount of people in here.
Shout out
David McNew. Yep, David McNew, who's always in there. Obviously, Niner Sickness was in here today. Paul Hope, who's also in here today. So we had a good amount of people in here. So I appreciate obviously when the chat is commenting and just being in here and viewing and just watching the stream. I appreciate it tremendously. If you haven't already subscribed to my channel as well, please go do so. We are trying to get through 1,000 subscribers before the end of the season. I know it's a pretty hard task, but the closer we can get to that milestone, it would be great. Go like this video if you haven't already. I appreciate you for joining me, Rohan. It was a pleasure to have you on. I definitely will have you on again during the season. But that basically wraps up the show. I appreciate everybody in the chat. I appreciate you for joining me, Rohan. First preseason game is in 2 weeks from now. But appreciate everybody and appreciate you for obviously for joining me. But that basically wraps. Okay, I appreciate you for reminding me. Shout out to you, Rohan. You reached 300 subscribers, which is a huge milestone. So congratulations on reaching 300 subscribers. I know you've been grinding a lot and you've been doing a lot of hard work. So shout out to you. Congratulations on reaching 300 subscribers. Thank you for reminding me. No Border Sports. I was gonna
Yeah,
mention it, but
I'm
I
not
completely
gonna lie.
forgot.
Like it was in the middle of my stream. Because I don't check my own channel that much. So if nobody in the chat would have reminded me, I would not have realized that I hit the 300. So thank you, No Border Sports, and everybody else who was in the chat to remind me.
Yep. I mean, it was huge. Obviously, it was during the end of your stream, but I mean, you probably I didn't even know if you realized or not. But you were just doing your stream. But obviously, thank you for joining me once again, Rohan. And someone's just subscribed, Man Amongst Savages. Just subscribe to your channel. But he says he the man. But that basically wraps up the show. I will be on the camper report at 8 o'clock today, where we'll be talking more training camp and more things on the camper reports channel today. Go check him out also. But thank you for joining me, Rohan, and we'll see you guys next time. Peace.
Yeah.